Hello, in this video we are going to cover user story in detail. We are going to cover the definition of user story format, we'll go over an example, we'll then discuss the requirements for making a good user story, steps of developing a good user story, we'll touch upon collection of user story types, some of the advantages of user stories, and finally we'll briefly touch upon the difference between user story and use case, which is another form of requirement documentation. So what is a user story? User story is a short description of the software requirement from the end user's perspective. Remember that user story is just a piece of software requirement. It's not the entire software requirement. There are other things that supplement a user story. A user story template has three components: who, what, and why. Who is the user role or persona? What is the action that the user would be performing? And why is the value or the benefit that the user would get after performing the action? Remember that user story does not focus on how. That goes into other parts of the software requirements. As an example, acceptance criteria. Now let's take a look at an example of a user story. As a CFO, I would like to check company's financial statement online so that I can make the right decisions on future investments. Here, CFO is who, or the user role or persona. Checking company's financial statement online is the action or the what, and then making the right decisions for company's future investment is the value that CFO would drive out of that action. Now, what makes a good user story? For that, we are going to refer to Bill Wake's Invest mnemonic, which was created for Agile methodology. And this applies to all PBIs, which is product backlog items. And user story is one of the product backlog items. So user story should be independent. There shouldn't be any dependency with other user stories. User story should be negotiable. So the user requirements and the details of the stories, how the functionality is going to be built, is open to discussion. User story should add value to the end user in terms of the functionality that is developed. User story should be estimable. So the development team should clearly be able to estimate the effort or the timelines that it will take to roll out a user story. A user story should be small enough. So as an example, it should not be a collection of larger product requirements that it becomes impossible to estimate the effort and the timelines for a story. A user story should be testable, so it should be clear through the user story, but then in addition to that, the associated requirements that are captured as an example through acceptance criteria, that the developers and the testers should be able to test the underlying functionality that is associated with the story. Now let's take a look at the steps for creating a good user story. For this, we are going to refer to XP Creator's Ron Jeffries 3C steps. The first step for creating a good user story refers to a card. So this could be a simple description of a user story as shared in the examples of the CFO who would require financial report for making better decisions. Something that could be easily captured on a card with simple annotations and requirements. Then the second step for creating a user story is conversation. And around that simple user story from step one, different stakeholders, be it the developers, product owners, customers, they can have healthy conversation around it. And then they can drill down into the actual requirements and how the functionality is supposed to be developed. And finally, once everything is agreed upon, there's a confirmation stage. And this would often be a written document that is a follow-up to the verbal communication from the conversation stage. This written document again could contain the user story, but then in addition to that, everything that supplements it. It could be acceptance criteria, wireframes, and everything that could drive detailed development and testing. User stories can be grouped together in a couple of ways. The first one is epic, and this is a tightly connected set of user stories. Think of it as an example where a user might want to go through the experience of buying something online, and there could be different user stories. As an example, user should be able to search for an item, user should be able to add it to the cart, user should be able to enter the credit card info, and they should be able to buy the product. So these could be separate user stories, but for a business to deliver some sort of value to the end user, they have to release all these user stories together, and so they form they're part of an epic. And then there's a second set of user stories, which is known as theme. And this could be a loosely connected set of either user stories or epics. Think of it as an example. You could have a collection of reports that you want to release to certain stakeholders or business users. A set of reports could be around procurement. A set of reports could be around operations or productivity. Third set of reports could be around financial information. So you can release these reports independently and still be able to provide value to the end user. So they are part of a broader theme, and in that way, sort of less tightly connected. There is another collection of user stories known as initiatives. I think that's come up from Jira. You may want to look it up online. Now, let's quickly touch upon some of the benefits or advantages of documenting requirements in the format of user stories. As it's been quite obvious from what we have discussed earlier on in this tutorial, principles such as invest and the process of 3C really make development easier when you're working with user stories. Why? User stories are easy to understand, so everyone across the board, be it the developers or the business users or the product owners, have a common understanding of what they're trying to build. User stories do a good job of driving the conversation with something that's sort of very light to begin with, and then it drives the entire team towards a common understanding of what they're trying to build. And then user stories suit well to the agile or iterative development methodology. They are light, they are independent, they can be worked upon independently, and then the development times are really short. So they kind of suit well to 2 to 3 week sprint cycles that you generally associate with agile development. Now, this is one of the common questions that often comes up, especially with those people who may have used use case, which is another form of documenting requirements. While there are similarities between user story and use case, there are some key differences. While user story has a simple format in terms of it focuses on who, what, and why, use case has a different format. It focuses on users' actual interactions with the system, and then what would be the expected goal or end state at the end of that interaction. Use cases can also be more detailed in the sense that while user story is fairly simple, use cases can go into the details of the sequence of actual interactions and then what would be the achieved goals at the end of the process. If you would like to learn more about use case in detail, I would highly recommend that you watch our use case tutorial. So that sums up this tutorial. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please put that in the comment section of the video, or alternatively submit your feedback at launchpad.com. Thank you.